Next story. The Count's Chauffeur, a series of complete stories by William Le Queux. Number 2. A Sentimental Swindle. Count Bendo's retreat near Winchester proved to be a rather small, isolated house near Kingsworthy. It stood on its own grounds, surrounded by a high wall, and at the rear was a very fair garage that had been specifically constructed with an inspection pit and various appliances. The house was rather well furnished, but the only servant was a man who turned out to be none other than the yellow-haired young fellow who had been introduced to me at Cecil as Mr. Henderson. He no longer wore the light fancy vest and smartly cut clothes, but it was a somewhat shabby suit of black. He smiled grimly as I recognized him, while his master said, "Got back all right, Henderson?" "I arrived only 10 minutes ago, sir. All was quiet, wasn't it?" "Oh, absolutely," replied the Count, who then went upstairs, and I saw him no more that evening. For nearly a fortnight, the car remained in the garage. It now bore a different identification plate, and to kill time I idled about, wondering when they should start again. It was a strange menage. Count Bendo was a very easygoing cosmopolitan, who treated both Henderson and myself as intimates, inasmuch we ate at table with him and smoked together each evening. We were simply waiting. The papers were, of course, full of the clever theft and killings, and the police, it appeared, were doing their utmost to track the tricksters, but in vain. The Count, under the name of Mr. Claude Fielding, seemed to be very popular in the neighborhood, though he discouraged visitors. Indeed, no one came there. He dined, however, at several houses during the second week of his concealment, and seemed to be quite confident of the safety. At last we left, but not, however, without Sir Charles Blythe had stayed one night with us, and made some confidential report to his friend. It being apparent that all was clear, and some further alteration was both made to the appearance of the car and to the personal aspect of Count Bendo and myself, after which we started to the continent by way of Southampton. We crossed and ran up to Paris, where we stayed at the Ritz. The Count proved a devil-may-care fellow with plenty of friends in the French capital. When with the latter, he treated me with the servants. When alone, I was a friend. Whatever the result of the clever piece of trickery in Bond Street, it was quite clear that my employer was in funds and spent freely, dined and supped at the most expensive restaurants, and thoroughly enjoyed himself with his chums. We left Paris and went to the broad road of lands to Monte Carlo. It was just before Christmas, and the season had, of course, not yet commenced. We stayed at the Hotel de Paris, and the hotel where most men and garçons put up. In the car I put into the Garage Mignon. It was the first time I'd seen Monte, and it attracted me as it does every man and woman. Here, too, Bendo de Ferrarris seemed to have hosts of friends. He dined at the Grand, the Metropole, the Riviera Palace, and supped each night at Ciro's, indulging in a little mild play in the rooms of the interval between the two meals. He did not often go out to the car, but frequently went to Nice and Cannes by train. About a fortnight later, after our arrival, however, he ran, one bright morning, along the lower road to Brignoles to Nice. Bad, by the way, on account of the sharp corners and electric trams, and called at a small hotel at Boulevard Gambetta. The Count apparently had an appointment with a tall, dark-haired, extremely good-looking young French girl, with whom he had lunched at a small restaurant, and afterwards he walked for an hour on the promenade, talking with her very earnestly. She was not more than 19, a smart, very chic little Parisian, quietly dressed in black, but the clothes that bore unmistakably a cachet of the first-class dressmaker. They took a turn at Jeté Promenade, and presently returned to the hotel, and the Count told her to go and get a close hat and a thick coat, and he would wait for her. Then, when she had gone, he told me that they were about to take her over to Bristol at Bartholomew, that great white hotel that lies so sheltered at the most delightful bay of the whole Riviera. It was a clear, bright December afternoon. The roads were perfect, though dusty as the Grunge always is. And very soon, with the Count and his lady friend, I swung into the curved drive before the hotel. "You can go to the garage for an hour or so, Ewert," my employer said. After then, they descended. Therefore, I turned the car and went to the huge garage at the rear of the hotel, a garage which every motorist on the Riviera knows well. After an hour, I re-entered the hotel and looked for the Count to receive orders, when I saw, in the great red-carpeted lounge, my employer, the little Parisian, seated with a man whom I knew as Sir Charles Blythe, but who really was one of the Count Bendo's confederates. We exchanged glances, and his was a meaning one. That some deep and ingenious game was in progress, I felt certain, but what it was, I had no idea. Blythe was smartly dressed in a gray flannel suit and white shoes, a costume de rire of the Riviera, and as he smoked a cigar and easily reclining in one of the wicker lounge chairs, he presented the complete picture of the English aristocrats, putting in a month or two in the sunshine. Both men were talking earnestly in French with a dark-eyed little lady who now and then laughed, or, raising her shoulders, looked from one to the other and protruded her chin in a gesture of uncertainty. I retired and watched closely. I could quite plain in a few moments see that the young lady was entirely devoted with handsome Bendo. Both manner and glances betrayed her. I saw him look at Blythe, and then they were working it towards some prearranged end. Presently, a noisy part of the American girls who had just entered from the Monte entered and sat close to them, calling for tea. Therefore, the trio rose and went into the evening dusk. They wished, it seemed, to talk in private. I received orders to bring the car around and drove them the three black to Nice, which we reached in plenty of time for dinner. "Now, you will not forget Gabrielle, you're sure?" said Bendo in French as he handed her out of the car and shook her hand as he bared his head. "I've promised, monsieur," was her reply in a low, rather musical voice. "I shall not forget." Then she bowed to Blythe and ascended the steps and disappeared into the hotel. Her quietness and neatness of dress to me were quite attractive. She was a dainty little thing, yet her plain black dress, so well cut, was really severe. She had the manner of a lady, sweet and demure. The air of a woman of the world was, somehow, entirely absent. Well, to confess it, I found myself admiring her very much. She was, I thought, delightful, one of the prettiest girls I'd ever seen. Evidently our run to Berlioz and back was her first experience of motoring, for she laughed with girlish delight when, on an open piece of road here and there, I put on a move, and as she disappeared into the hotel, she turned and waved her tiny black-gloved hand back to the handsome Bendo. "Done, my dear chap," chuckled Blythe in a low voice to his companion, as a neat figure disappeared behind the glass swing doors. "The rest is easy, and if we keep up pluck." "It's a big thing, of course, but I'm sanguine enough," declared my employer. "That little girl is a perfect brick. She's completely unsuspicious. Flattering court-woman, and if she falls in love with you, she'll go to any length to serve you." "You're a splendid lover," declared Sir Charles as he mounted into the car beside the Count, while the latter, laughing lightly, bent to me, saying, "Back to the Monte Carlo, as quick as we can get." I slipped along out of Nice and through the Villefranche, through Barclay, and slowing up around the corners, and traveling sharply on the open road, and we were soon back at the Paris. Having put the car into the garage, I walked around to the hotel and transformed myself into a little leather-coated chauffeur into a Monte Carlo lounger, and just before 10 o'clock met the Count going across the flower-scented place to the rooms. He was alone and recognized me and crossed and said, "Ewert, let's walk up through the gardens. I want to have a word with you." I turned on my heel and strolled with him. "You know what we've done today. You stand in so that you can just shut your eyes to anything that isn't exactly in order, understand? There's a big thing before us, a very big thing, a thing that's simply dropped from the clouds. You want money, so do I. We all want money. Just keep a still tongue and obey my orders, and you'll see that we're bringing off the biggest coup that the Riviera has ever known. I know how to be silent, I said. I did not like the aspect of the affairs. Yes, you do. I give you credit for that. One word of this, and I will go a durance vile. Silence, and a whole world of us will profit and get the wherewithal to live. I often think, Ewert, that in public, as they call it, the British public are extraordinary people. They are so confoundedly honest. But nowadays, there surely isn't any honesty in life, at least not that I've ever found. Why, your honest businessman who goes to church and chapel every Sunday and is a model of the virtues in the city is a very man who will drive a hard bargain and pay a starvation wage and button his pockets against a widow. Who are you successful men in business? Why, for the most part, the men who, by dint of sharp practice or unscrupulousness, have been able to get in front of their competitors. Therefore, after all, am I very much worse than the successful city man? I live on my brains, and while I'm happy to say I've lived very well, up to the present, but enough of this philanthropy, laughed the easygoing young scoundrel. I want to give you instructions. You will stand in with us, Ewert. Your share of the Gilling affair is your credit, and you'll have it gone before long. At present, we have another little martyr at hand, one which requires extremely delicate handling. But it will be successful, providing Mademoiselle Gabrielle doesn't change her mind. But women are so fickle, and mourning brings prudence far too frequently. You'll see some strange happenings tomorrow or the next day. Keep your eyes and ears closed. That's all you have to do. You understand, right? Well, perfectly, was my reply, for my curiosity was now thoroughly whetted. There was a desperate project in the air, and the spirit of adventure had now entered thoroughly into me. Early next morning I drove the Count back to Nice, from a quiet spot in the mainland, where he met the pretty Gabrielle clandestinely. When we drew up to where she was apparently waiting for us, I saw that she was annoyed at my presence. "Ewert, my chauffeur," he exclaimed, introducing me, "will say nothing about this meeting. He knows how to be discreet." I raised my peaked motor cap as our eyes met. I thought I detected a curiously timid glance in them. For an instant she dropped her gaze. That she was an intimate friend of the Count was shown by her instructions he gave her. "You two walk down the Promenade d'Anglaise, and I'll meet you at the other end by the Hotel Suite. I'll take the car myself to the garage." This meant I was to walk with her a full 3/4 of an hour along the whole of the seafront of Nice. Why, I wondered. "But, Bindo, can't you come?" "I'll meet you outside the Suite. It's better to do that," he answered. "Go along, you'll find Ewert a clever fellow. Tell her how you drive a motor car." She laughed, and then, as Bindo mounted the car again and turned away, we strolled together on the broad asphalt back towards the town. The morning was delightful, the bright sunshine and blue sea. The sweet-smelling wallflowers were already out, and the big palms were lazily up the soft breeze. I quickly found my companion most charming, and envied the Count in his acquaintanceship. Was she marked down as a victim, or was she an accomplice? I could not grasp the motive for being sent to walk the whole length of the promenade with her, but the Count and his companions were, they admitted, working a big thing, and this was part of it, I suppose. "This is the first time you've been to Nice, huh?" she asked in her pretty broken English, and she stopped a moment and opened her sunshade. "Yes," I answered, "but the Count is an old happy, I believe." "Oh, yes," she laughed. "He knows everybody. Last year he was on the Fêtes Committee and one of the judges of the Battle of Flowers." And so we gossiped on, walking leisurely and passing many who, like ourselves, were idling in sunshine. There was an air of refined ingenuousness about her that was perfectly attractive. She walked well, holding her skirt tightly about her as only a true Parisian can, and displaying a pair of extremely neat ankles. She inquired about me, how long I'd been in the Count's service, how I liked him, and such, while I, by careful questioning, discovered that her name was Gabrielle de Luz, and that she came from the Côte d'Azur each season. Just as we were opposite the white facade of the Hotel Westminster, we encountered a short, rather stout, middle-aged lady, accompanied by a tall, thin, white-haired gentleman. They were well dressed, and the lady wearing splendid sables. She started when she recognized him, instantly lowering her sunshade in order to hide her face. Whether the pair noticed her, I cannot say. I only know that, as soon as they were past, she exclaimed in annoyance, "I can't think why Bimbo sent you along here with me." "I regret, mademoiselle, that my companionship should be distasteful to you," I said, mystified.
No, not that, Marcel," she cried anxiously. "I do not mean that. You do not know. How can you know what I mean?"
"You probably mean that you ought not be seen walking here in the Promenade d'Anglaise with a common chauffeur."
"If you are a chauffeur, Marcel, you are also a gentleman,"
she said, looking straight into my face. "I thank mademoiselle for her high compliment," I said, bowing, for really I was in no way adverse to a little mild flirtation with a delightful young companion. And yet what I wondered was my role in this latest complicated trickery. She quickened her pace, glancing anxiously at everyone we met, as though wishing to arrive at the end of our walk. I was very sorry our little chat was drawing to a close. I would like to have had her in my side the day's run in the car, and I told her so.
"Perhaps you will take me on a long trip one day. Who knows?"
She laughed.
"Yesterday it was perfect."
A few moments later we arrived at the Suite, and from a seat in the promenade Count Bindo was to greet us. He had left his motor coat and cap in the car, and stood before us in grey flannels and white soft felt hat. Smart, handsome figures, such as women honestly admire. Indeed, Bindo was essentially a ladies' man, for he seemed to have a bowing acquiescence with hundreds of the fair sex. "Why, Gabrielle and Ewert have been saying lots of pretty things to you, eh?"
"Oh, how kind of you,"
she protested, blushing slightly.
"You really ought not to say such things."
Well, forgive me, won't you?" said the Count quickly, and together we strolled into the town, where we had an appetite at the gay Café de l'Opera, opposite the public gardens. Here, however, a curious contretemps occurred. She accidentally upset her glass of Demelay over her left hand, saturating her white glove so that she compelled to take it off. "Why," ejaculated the Count in sudden amazement, pointing to her uncovered hand, "what does that mean?" She wore a ring upon her wedding finger. Her face went crimson, and for a moment the pretty girl was too confused to speak.
"Ah,"
she cried in a low, earnest tone as she bent before him.
"Forgive me, Bindo. I did not tell you. How could I?"
"You should have told me. It was your duty to tell me. Remember, we are old friends. How long have you been married?"
"Only 3 weeks. This is my honeymoon."
"And your husband?"
4 days ago, business took him to Genoa. He is still absent."
"And in the meanwhile you meet me and our little Gabrielle of the olden days, eh?" remarked Bindo, placing both elbows upon the marble-topped table, looking straight into her face.
"Do you blame me then?" she asked. "I admit I've deceived you, but it was imperative. Our encounter has brought back all the days of summer, and about 2 years ago when we met at Fortinam. Do you still remember them?"
Her eyes trembled. I saw that, though married, she still regarded the handsome Bindo with a good deal of affection. I don't blame you, was a soft reply. I suppose it was anybody else would have done in those circumstances. But do I remember those days, you ask? Why, of course I do. Those picnics in the forest with you, your mother and your little sister Julie were delightful days. Days never return, alas. And you are really worried. Well, you must tell me about it later. Let's lunch together at the London house. Then he added reflectively, really, this is a discovery. The little Gabrielle is actually married. I had no idea. She laughed, blushing again.
No, I don't suppose you had. I'm very, very foolish to take off my glove. Yet, if I kept it up the deception much longer, I might perhaps have compromised myself.
Was it not, well, a little risky for you to go to Baloo with me yesterday?
Yes, it was foolish, very foolish, Bingo. I ought not have met you today. I ought not have told you the truth from the very first.
Not at all. Even if your husband is away, there's surely no reason why you should not speak to an old friend like myself, is there?
Yes, I'm known in Nice, as you're aware.
Known as the prettiest woman who comes on the Riviera, he declared, taking her hand and examining the wedding ring and the fine circle of diamonds above it. Bindo de Ferrari was an expert at gems.
Don't be a flatterer,
She protested with a light laugh.
You've said that, you know, hundreds of times before.
I've said only what's the truth, and I'm sure Ewert will bear me out. I do, most certainly. Madam is most charming, I hesitated. It was undoubtedly an honest opinion, and I was, however, disappointed equally with the Count's to discover that the dainty divinity in black was married. She was certainly not more than 19, and had been the self-possessed air of a matron about her. Twice during that conversation I had go out, and the Count bade me stay, saying with a laugh, "There's nothing in this that you may not hear. Madam has deceived us both." He treated the situation as a huge joke, and yet I detected that the deception had annoyed him. Had the plans he had laid out upon by the unexpected discovery of the marriage? From his demeanor and suppressed chagrin, I felt sure that they had been. Suddenly I glanced at his watch, and then taking from his pocket an envelope containing some small quarter of an object, about 2 inches long and 1 inch broad, he said, "Go to the station at 12:15 from Berlin to Cannes. You'll find Sir Charles Blythe on the train. Give him this from me, and say that I'll meet him at Booth's site at Cannes at 4 o'clock. Have the car ready at 2, and I'll come to the garage. You haven't much time to spare, so take a cab." I rose, raised my hat to the dark-eyed little woman, and bowed gracefully, and then, mounting up to Ferrarris, drove rapidly to the avenue. The situation was this. The ideal of a Sunday morning had been shattered. Gabrielle, of the luminous eyes, was already a wife. I met the train and discovered Sir Charles looking out for me. I handed him the packet and gave him the Count's message. I noticed that he had some light luggage with him, and I presumed that he was moving from Baloo to Cannes, to the tea and tennis bow site. Then, when the train had moved off, I wandered across a small restaurant opposite the station and lunched alone, thinking and wondering about the dainty little girl-wife who had so completely fascinated me. That she was still in love with Bindo was quite clear, and yet, on his part, was distinctively annoyed at being perceived. At 2 o'clock, almost punctually, he had entered the garage and flung his hat into the car and put on his cap, goggles, and motor coat. And without a word, I drew up the 40. "Napier," he came out to the road. "To Cannes, quick," he shouted. "Around to the right in the room wagon, and straight ahead. You saw Blythe?" "Yes, I gave him the packet of the message." "Good. Then we haven't any time to lose. Get a move on wherever you go." On we flew, as fast as the sharp corners would allow, until presently we slipped down the long hill to Cannes, and passing through the town, pulled up to the bow site, where we found Sir Charles awaiting us. The latter had changed his clothes, and now was in a and was idly smoking a cigar as we swept around to the entrance. Two men met enthusiastically. Some words were exchanged in undertone, and both burst out laughing, a laugh of triumph. Was it the expense of poor little Gabrielle? I was left outside to mind the car, and waited for fully an hour and a half. As the wind blew bitterly cold at sundown, as it always does in the Riviera in December, and I was glad to have my big fur coat. Whatever the subject of discussion, it was evidently a weighty one. Both men had gone into Blythe's room and were closeted there. A little after 5, Blythe came out and hailed a cab and drove away into town, while the Count, whose appearance was so entirely changed that I scarcely knew him, sauntered slowly down the hall after his friend. Blythe had evidently brought some of the fresh clothes from Monte Carlo, and he had used his room as a dressing room. He looked very much older. The dark brown suit he now wore was out of shape and ill-fitting. His hair showed gray over the ears, and he wore gold spectacles. Instantly I saw that the adventurous scheme was still in progress, so I descended and lit the big headlights. About a dozen idlers were in the vicinity of the car, and in sight of them all he struggled into the big motor car, and entering gave me orders to drive to the center of town. Then, after we got clear of the hotel, he said, "Stop at the station. We have to pick up Blythe." Directed by him, we were soon at the spot where Sir Charles awaited us. "I've got him," he exclaimed in a low voice as he took out the gasp. He took out a big coat and motor cap and goggles. "Quick work, wasn't it?" "Excellent," declared the Count, and then, bending to me, he added, "Round there to the left. The high road is a little further on. To Marseille." "To Marseille," I echoed, surprised that we were going so far as 100-odd miles. But at that moment I saw the wide highway and turned into it, and our big searchlights throwing a white radiance on the road. I set the car westward through St. Raphael and Les Arcs. It commenced to rain, with a biting wind, and turned out a very disagreeable night, but, urged on by both men, I went forward as quick as a pace as I dared to go on the road, over which I had never before traveled. At Toulon we pulled up for a drink, for by that time we were all three chilled to the bone, notwithstanding our heavy leather-lined coats, and then we set out again for Marseille, which we reached just after 1 o'clock in the morning, drawing up the Rue de Paris, which every visitor in the capital of southern France knows so well. Here we had a pretty good meal of the cold meat and bach. Prior, however, to entering Marseille, we had halted, changed our identification plate, and made certain alterations to further disguise the car. After supper, we all got in again, and Bindo directed me up and down several long streets until we were once more in the suburbs. In a quiet, unfrequented road we pulled up, where from beneath the dark shadow of the wall a man silently approached us. I could not distinguish his face in the darkness, but from his voice I knew him to be none other than Henderson, the servant from Kingsworthy. "Wait here for half an hour, then run the car back to the church I pointed out to you as we came along, the one at the top of the Channelgrave. Wait for us there. We shall be perhaps an hour, perhaps a little more," said the Count, taking out a stick from his car, and then the trio disappeared into the darkness. Fully an hour elapsed, until at length the long shadow three kept crouching up cautiously, each one bearing a heavy bundle wrapped in black cloth, which they deposited in the car. The contents of the bundle was chinked as they were placed upon the floor. What their booty was, I knew not. The next instant, however, all three were in. The door was closed, and I drew off in the dark open road straight before me, and out into the driving rain. The Count, who was at my side, seemed panting and agitated. "We brought it up all right, Ewert," he whispered, bending his knee moments later. "And behind's over £20,000 worth of jewelry for us to divide later. We must get to the Valence for breakfast, and thence Henderson will take the stuff away to the train by Holland." "But how? What have you done?" I asked, puzzled. "I'll explain in the morning, when we've got rid of it all." He did explain. Blythe and Henderson both left us at Valence and booty, while Bindo and myself, in the morning sunshine, went towards an easy pace along the Lions Road. The affair wanted just a little bit of delicate maneuvering, he asked. It was an affair of the heart, you see. We knew that the pretty little Gabrielle was married to old Lamar, a well-known jeweler in Canada, Marseille, and that she had gone to spend her honeymoon in Nice. Unknown to either, I took a room of theirs at the hotel, and thanks to the communicating doors they have for in hotels, I overheard the husband explain that he must go to Genoa on pressing business. He also left her safe keys, the duplicates of those held by his manager in Marseille, and injunctions to keep them locked up in her trunk. I allowed him to be absent for a couple of days, then, quite unexpectedly, I met her at the promenade, pretending, of course, that I was entirely unaware of her marriage with old Lemaire. In case of accident, however, it was necessary that the little woman should be compromised with somebody, and as you were so discreet, I sent you both yesterday morning to walk the whole length of the promenade. In the meantime, I nipped back to the hotel, entered Gabrielle's room, obtained the 2 safe keys, and took impressions of them in wax. These I put into a tin matchbox and sent them by you to Blythe station. Blythe, with his usual foresight, had already engaged a locksmith in Cannes, telling him a little fairy story of how he lost his safe keys, and how his manager in London, who had duplicates, had sent him the impressions. The keys were made to time. Blythe took the cab to the hotel and got them, and rejoined us at the Cannes station. Then we went on to Marseille. There was a fare easily after, but more risky. Henderson had already been reconnoitring the shop for a week, and had conceived a clever plan by which he got in from the rear, quickly opened the 2 big safes with copied keys, and cleared out all of Lemare's best stock. I'm rather sorry to have treated little Gabrielle so, but after all, it really doesn't hurt her, for old Lamar is very rich, and he won't miss £20,000 as much as we're in need of it. The loving husband is still in Genoa, but poor little Gabrielle is no doubt thinking herself a fool for having so prematurely shown her wedding ring.